Sometimes the biggest mistake isn't denying a stranger. It's forgetting who built the door you're standing behind. The words might have sounded impossible if anyone had said them that evening, but within the next few minutes, they would become the only thing anyone in the grand lobby could think about. Rain tapped softly against the towering glass windows of the Bennett Grand Hotel in downtown Charlotte, North Carolina, while warm golden chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors that looked almost too perfect to walk on. Guests rolled expensive luggage toward the front desk. Business travelers checked messages between meetings, and a pianist in the corner filled the air with quiet jazz that blended into the gentle hum of conversations. Everything about the hotel whispered luxury, comfort, and belonging. Then the revolving doors opened, and a man stepped inside holding the hand of a little girl. Marcus Bennett wore faded blue jeans, a dark zip-up jacket, and well-worn sneakers that still carried traces of dust from a long day of travel. Beside him walked 7-year-old Ava Bennett, clutching a small stuffed rabbit against her chest. Her curly hair was slightly messy after a delayed flight, and her eyelids drooped with the kind of exhaustion only children could no longer hide. She yawned as they crossed the gleaming lobby, looking around with sleepy curiosity before leaning gently against her father's arm. Marcus smiled down at her. "Just a few more minutes, sweetheart," he whispered. "Then you can finally get some rest." Ava nodded without complaining. She trusted her father completely. The two of them approached the reception desk where Olivia Harper stood behind a spotless white counter, her tailored navy blazer perfectly pressed, her posture flawless, and her practiced smile ready for the next guest. At least, it looked ready until she glanced up and saw Marcus. Her smile faded almost instantly. Her eyes traveled slowly from his worn shoes to the little girl beside him before returning to his face. It lasted only a second, but Marcus noticed. Years of experience had taught him to recognize that look. It was the silent calculation people sometimes made before saying a single word. "Good evening," Marcus said politely. "I need one room for tonight." Olivia barely touched the keyboard before shaking her head. "I'm sorry, sir. We're fully booked." Marcus looked around the spacious lobby. Several guests were still checking in, but something felt off. He smiled politely. "Would you mind checking once more?" Olivia sighed almost imperceptibly before tapping a few random keys. "Like I said, there aren't any rooms available." Before Marcus could answer, the revolving doors turned again. A middle-aged white couple entered carrying matching leather luggage. Olivia's entire expression transformed. "Welcome to Bennett Grand," she said brightly. "You're just in time. We have a beautiful executive suite available overlooking the city." Marcus remained completely still. Ava looked up at him, confused. "Daddy," she whispered softly. "I thought she said there weren't any rooms." Marcus gently squeezed her small hand without taking his eyes off the receptionist. "She did," he answered quietly. The couple accepted their room keys with grateful smiles before disappearing toward the elevators. The lobby returned to its peaceful rhythm as if nothing unusual had happened. Only Marcus remained standing at the counter, calm, patient, and strangely thoughtful. Olivia folded her hands together. "Sir, if there's nothing else, I'll have to help the next guest." Marcus looked up at the enormous crystal logo mounted behind the reception desk, the polished silver letters reflecting warm light across the marble walls. His expression never changed, but something behind his eyes did. It wasn't anger. It wasn't embarrassment. It was recognition. Quiet, unmistakable recognition. And without raising his voice even once, Marcus Bennett decided the next few minutes would reveal far more about this hotel than anyone working inside it could possibly imagine. Marcus stepped away from the reception desk without another word. There was no frustration on his face, no dramatic protest, no attempt to embarrass anyone standing nearby. Instead, he guided Ava toward a quiet seating area beneath a towering indoor maple tree whose golden leaves shimmered. Under warm lights, the oversized leather chairs overlooked the entire lobby, giving him a clear view of everything happening around him. Ava climbed onto one of the chairs, hugged her stuffed rabbit tighter, and rubbed her sleepy eyes. "Daddy, did we do something wrong?" she asked in a voice barely louder than a whisper. Marcus knelt beside her until they were eye level. "No, sweetheart," he replied gently. "Sometimes people make decisions before they know someone's story." Ava thought about that for a moment before nodding slowly. She had heard her father say similar things before. Ever since her mother passed away 3 years earlier, Marcus had raised her alone. He packed school lunches, braided her curls after watching countless tutorial videos, attended every parent conference, and never missed bedtime stories, even during his busiest weeks. Business success had never replaced fatherhood. If anything, becoming a single father had changed the way he looked at leadership forever. He believed every employee should remember that every guest walking through the front door carried a story no uniform or credit card could reveal. That belief had inspired the company values engraved inside every employee handbook, though Marcus sometimes wondered how many people still read them. This trip had never been announced. Over the past month, Marcus had quietly visited several Bennett Grand locations across the Southeast, traveling without assistance, private cars, or executive schedules. He wanted to experience the hotels exactly as ordinary guests did. Some locations had impressed him with genuine kindness. Others had revealed small cracks hidden beneath polished appearances. But tonight already felt different. Across the lobby, Olivia welcomed another arriving guest with effortless charm. Fresh coffee appeared almost immediately. A bellman hurried to carry expensive luggage before being asked. Every smile seemed perfectly rehearsed. Every movement reflected luxury. Yet Marcus could not ignore the contrast between the hospitality he was watching and the conversation he had just experienced. Luxury was easy to decorate. Character was much harder to build. Ava rested her head against his shoulder. "Can we go somewhere else?" she asked quietly. Marcus smiled. "Maybe." He brushed a loose curl away from her face before glancing once more toward the reception desk. He recognized nearly every design detail surrounding them because years ago he had approved them personally. The lighting had been chosen to create warmth after sunset. The music playlist changed automatically every hour to maintain a calm atmosphere. Even the scent drifting through the air came from a fragrance he had selected because it reminded him of cedarwood after a gentle rain. Every detail had been carefully planned to help strangers feel welcome. Yet the one thing that mattered most could never be installed by architects or purchased from designers. Kindness had to come from people. A few feet away, an elderly housekeeper pushing a linen cart noticed Ava fighting to stay awake. She offered the little girl a warm smile that required no training manual. Ava smiled back instinctively. Marcus noticed the exchange and quietly smiled as well. Genuine compassion was still here somewhere inside this building. The question was whether anyone in charge still knew how to recognize it. At that exact moment, Olivia looked toward the seating area again, whispered something to a security officer standing nearby, and both of them turned their attention toward Marcus and Ava with expressions that suggested the evening was only beginning. The security officer adjusted the sleeve of his navy jacket before walking toward Marcus with measured, professional steps. His name tag read Daniel Brooks, and although his expression remained polite, there was uncertainty in his eyes. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Good evening, sir," he said quietly. "The front desk has asked me to speak with you." Marcus looked up calmly. "Of course." Daniel glanced briefly at Ava, who had finally curled up against the leather chair, her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her chin. Her breathing had grown slower, each gentle breath almost blending into the soft piano music floating across the lobby. The sight made Daniel hesitate. "I am sorry," he continued carefully. "They believe you may be waiting here without a reservation. They have asked that I help you find another hotel nearby." Marcus nodded as though he had expected those exact words. "I understand," he replied. "Before we leave, may I ask you something?" Daniel seemed surprised. "Yes, sir." Marcus smiled warmly. "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 6 years." "Do you enjoy your job?" Daniel looked around the elegant lobby before answering honestly. "Most days, yes. I like helping people." Marcus studied him for a quiet moment. "That is a good answer." Daniel could not explain why, but something about the man's calm confidence made the conversation feel unusual. Most guests who had been turned away became frustrated, demanded managers, or threatened negative reviews. This man had done none of those things. Instead, he asked simple questions that somehow carried unexpected weight. Across the marble floor, Olivia watched the conversation closely. She folded her arms and leaned toward Ethan Collins, the young receptionist beside her. "Why is he still sitting there?" she whispered. Ethan shrugged. "Maybe he thinks we will change our minds." Olivia frowned. People like that always hope someone bends the rules. She straightened her blazer before walking halfway around the reception desk. "Daniel," she called firmly. Please remind the gentleman that the lobby is reserved for registered guests. Several nearby visitors glanced toward the exchange before returning to their conversations. Marcus slowly stood, careful not to wake Ava. That will not be necessary, he said politely. We will leave shortly. Olivia offered a thin professional smile that never reached her eyes. Thank you for understanding. Marcus looked toward the enormous silver letters mounted high behind the reception desk. Bennett Grant. His family name reflected beneath crystal lights that illuminated every corner of the lobby. He remembered standing in this very building during construction nearly 8 years earlier. He had insisted that every guest entering these doors should feel respected before they ever received a room key. Hospitality, he had told his leadership team, began long before check-in. Looking around now, he wondered when that lesson had been forgotten. Daniel noticed Marcus studying the hotel logo. Beautiful building, he said quietly, hoping to ease the awkward silence. Marcus smiled. Yes, it means a great deal to the family that built it. Daniel nodded politely without realizing the significance of those words. At that same moment, the elderly housekeeper Marcus had noticed earlier quietly approached carrying a folded fleece blanket from her linen cart. Without saying anything to Olivia or the reception staff, she gently draped it over sleeping Ava to keep her warm beneath the cool evening air conditioning. Marcus looked up with genuine gratitude. Thank you. The woman smiled softly. Every child deserves to sleep comfortably. She returned to her work before anyone else seemed to notice. Marcus watched her disappear down the hallway, and for the first time that evening, hope flickered behind his calm expression. Not every employee had forgotten what this place was supposed to represent. Some still understood that true hospitality was measured not by marble floors or crystal chandeliers, but by small acts of kindness offered when nobody believed they were being watched. Marcus waited until Ava was sleeping peacefully beneath the fleece blanket before reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out an ordinary cell phone with a slightly worn leather case, the kind no one would expect to belong to someone who owned a luxury hotel company. He unlocked the screen, scrolled through only a few contacts, and stopped at one name. There was no hesitation. He pressed the call button and lifted the phone to his ear. The call lasted less than 10 seconds. Good evening, Sarah, he said quietly. I need you to come to the Charlotte property. Please do not notify anyone on site. Bring the regional leadership team. Yes, right away. Thank you. He ended the call, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and returned his attention to his daughter. Nothing about his voice had sounded angry. If anything, it had been remarkably calm. Across the lobby, however, Olivia noticed the conversation from a distance. She folded her arms once again. Now he is calling someone to complain, she muttered. Ethan glanced over. Corporate customer service, maybe? Olivia gave a dismissive smile. It will not matter. Policies are policies. Yet something about Marcus continued to bother her. He had never argued. He had never demanded special treatment. He had never threatened lawsuits or bad publicity. His composure felt almost unnatural. Most people became louder when they believed they had been treated unfairly. Somehow, the quieter he became, the more uncomfortable she felt. Daniel returned to his position near the entrance, but found himself watching Marcus every few minutes. The conversation they had shared replayed in his mind. The stranger had asked about his work instead of defending himself. He had thanked the housekeeper more sincerely than many guests thanked executive staff. Even the little girl had accepted disappointment without complaining. None of it fit the assumptions made only minutes earlier. The pianist began playing a slower melody, and the lobby lights shifted automatically into their evening setting, casting warmer reflections across the polished marble floor. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Water clung to the hotel windows like tiny crystals, reflecting the city skyline beyond. Ava stirred beneath the blanket but remained asleep, her small hand still wrapped around the stuffed rabbit. Marcus gently adjusted the blanket over her shoulder before looking toward the reception desk one more time. He noticed something most guests never would. Framed behind Olivia was a bronze plaque displaying the company's mission statement. Every employee passed it countless times each day. The first sentence was engraved in large letters. Every guest deserves dignity before service. Marcus read the words silently, then lowered his eyes. The irony was impossible to ignore. Nearby, the elderly housekeeper quietly finished arranging fresh flowers beside the entrance. She glanced toward Marcus and offered another gentle smile. He smiled back. Kindness often arrived without titles or authority. Sometimes the people with the smallest responsibilities carried the greatest understanding of what hospitality truly meant. 10 minutes passed. Then, 15. The evening settled into its usual rhythm. Guests continued checking in, luggage carts rolled across the lobby, and elevators opened and closed with soft chimes. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary until headlights suddenly swept across the front entrance. One black executive sedan pulled beneath the covered driveway. Then another. Then a third. Valets exchanged puzzled glances as suited men and women stepped out with urgent expressions. Olivia looked through the glass doors, confused. No conference was scheduled. No celebrity guest was expected. She straightened her blazer instinctively as the first executive entered the lobby with determined strides, followed closely by several more. None of them stopped at the reception desk. None of them looked toward the elevators. Every single one of them was searching for someone. The first executive through the revolving doors was Sarah Whitmore, the company's chief operating officer. Her charcoal coat was still damp from the rain, but she did not pause to remove it. Behind her came Regional Director Michael Reynolds, the Vice President of Operations, 2 members of the executive leadership team, and several corporate compliance managers. Their footsteps echoed sharply across the marble floor, drawing every eye in the lobby. Guests lowered their phones. Conversations faded into whispers. Bellmen stopped pushing luggage carts. Even the pianist allowed the final note of his melody to linger before his hands fell still above the keys. Olivia immediately stepped forward with a polished smile. "Good evening. Welcome to Bennett Grand. How may we assist you?" Sarah barely glanced at her. "Where is he?" she asked. Olivia blinked. "I am sorry, Mr. Bennett." Sarah's voice remained calm, but every word carried unmistakable urgency. Olivia hesitated. I am not aware of anyone by that name checking in tonight." Sarah's expression changed almost imperceptibly. She slowly turned toward the seating area beneath the indoor maple tree. There, Marcus remained seated beside Ava, who was still peacefully asleep beneath the blanket. Sarah walked directly toward him without another word. The executives followed immediately. Behind her, Daniel watched in stunned silence as every member of corporate leadership bypassed the reception desk entirely. Marcus looked up as Sarah approached. She stopped several feet away, lowered her head respectfully, and spoke with genuine concern. "Mr. Bennett, I am so sorry we did not arrive sooner." Marcus stood quietly, careful not to wake Ava. "You came quickly," he replied. "Thank you." Sarah looked toward the sleeping little girl. "Is Ava all right?" Marcus smiled softly. "She is just tired." Sarah nodded before taking a slow breath. "I received your call. I brought everyone you requested." The lobby had become completely silent. Olivia stood frozen beside the reception desk. Ethan stared with wide eyes. Daniel felt his heart sink as pieces of the evening suddenly began falling into place. Sarah finally turned toward the reception area. "Would someone please explain why the owner of this company and his daughter have been sitting in the lobby without a room?" No one answered. The question seemed to hang in the air beneath the crystal chandeliers. Olivia swallowed hard. "Owner," she whispered almost inaudibly. Michael Reynolds stepped forward and looked directly at her. "Marcus Bennett founded this hotel group. His family name is on every building we operate." Olivia slowly turned toward the enormous silver logo mounted behind her. Bennett Grand, the same name she had walked beneath every morning for nearly 4 years. Suddenly it no longer felt like decoration. It felt like judgment. Ethan's face drained of color. Daniel lowered his eyes, replaying every conversation he had shared with Marcus that evening. The elderly housekeeper quietly placed a hand over her heart, not because she recognized the owner, but because she recognized the kindness he had shown everyone despite everything that had happened. Marcus noticed her standing nearby and offered another grateful smile. She smiled back with quiet dignity. Sarah looked at Marcus again. "Would you like us to move this discussion upstairs?" Marcus gently glanced toward Ava, still sleeping peacefully beneath the blanket. "No," he answered calmly. "Everyone who witnessed tonight should also witness." What happens next? This is not about embarrassment. It is about remembering who we promised to be. No one in the lobby moved. Even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed louder than the silence now surrounding every person inside the building. For several long seconds, no one spoke. The silence settled over the lobby more heavily than the marble columns or the crystal chandeliers above them. Marcus looked around the room, not with anger, but with quiet disappointment. His eyes moved from the reception desk to the concierge station, then toward the bronze plaque displaying the company's mission statement. Every guest deserves dignity before service. He walked slowly toward it, running his fingertips lightly across the engraved words. I remember approving this plaque, he said softly. I wanted every employee to see it before starting each shift. Sarah Whitmore lowered her eyes. Michael Reynolds remained motionless. The executives understood that this conversation had already become larger than one hotel or one evening. Marcus turned back toward the gathered employees. When I started this company, I could not afford marble floors or grand chandeliers. My first property had 28 rooms and a leaking roof whenever it rained. But every guest who walked through our doors left knowing they mattered. That was our greatest luxury. Olivia's breathing became shallow. She wanted to speak, but no words came. Marcus continued in the same calm voice. Tonight my daughter did not ask why we could not have a room. She asked whether we had done something wrong. He paused and glanced toward Ava, who remained asleep beneath the soft blanket. No child should ever leave one of our hotels believing they are less valuable than someone else. Daniel felt his throat tighten. The elderly housekeeper quietly wiped away a tear before returning her hands to the handle of her linen cart. Marcus noticed her again. Ma'am, he said gently. May I ask your name? The woman looked surprised. Helen Carter, sir. Marcus smiled warmly. Thank you, Miss Helen. You were the only person tonight who saw a tired little girl before you saw anything else. Helen smiled shyly. She looked cold. Marcus nodded. Exactly. He turned back toward everyone else. Compassion does not require permission. It only requires character. Sarah stepped forward carefully. Mr. Bennett, Corporate Human Resources is prepared to begin a formal review immediately. Marcus lifted one hand slightly, asking her to wait. Not yet. He looked directly at Olivia for the first time since the executives had arrived. She stood perfectly still, her confidence replaced by uncertainty. Miss Harper, Marcus said gently, when I asked for a room, what did you see? Olivia swallowed hard. A guest. Marcus shook his head almost imperceptibly. No. You saw clothing. You saw assumptions. You saw someone you believed did not belong. The words were spoken without accusation, making them even harder to hear. Olivia lowered her eyes. I was wrong, she whispered. Marcus nodded. Yes, but this is not only about being wrong. Every decision you make teaches the employees beside you what kind of company we are becoming. Ethan stared at the floor, realizing he had followed Olivia's lead without questioning it. Daniel quietly remembered how close he had come to escorting Marcus and Ava outside simply because someone else had judged them first. Marcus slowly looked across the lobby at every employee still watching. Leadership is not measured by how we treat important people. It is measured by how we treat people we believe can do nothing for us. Outside, the clouds finally parted, allowing the first rays of moonlight to reflect through the towering glass windows. The silver Bennett Grand logo glowed softly against the marble wall, and for the first time that evening, everyone in the lobby understood that the name above them had never represented a building. It represented a promise. The only question remaining was who still deserved to wear it. Marcus let the silence linger for another moment before turning towards Sarah Whitmore. I asked you to bring the leadership team because I wanted witnesses, not spectators, he said calmly. Tonight is not about protecting a reputation. It is about protecting a culture. Sarah nodded without hesitation. You have my word. Marcus looked at Daniel first. Officer Brooks. Daniel straightened instinctively. Yes, sir. When you approached me earlier, you were carrying out instructions. But before that conversation ended, you chose respect over assumption. You asked questions instead of raising your voice. That matters. Daniel swallowed hard. Thank you, sir. I should have asked more questions from the beginning. Marcus smiled gently. The important thing is that you are willing to learn. Then Marcus turned toward Ethan Collins. The young receptionist looked as though he wished the polished marble floor might open beneath him. Mr. Collins, Marcus said, how long have you been with this company? 11 months, sir. Who taught you how to welcome guests? Ethan glanced toward Olivia before lowering his eyes again. I followed the example I saw every day. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Exactly. Culture spreads faster than policy. People rarely become what the handbook says. They become what leadership demonstrates. Ethan's shoulders slumped as the realization settled over him. Marcus finally faced Olivia Harper. Her hands trembled slightly as she struggled to meet his eyes. Miss Harper, do you remember the interview question we ask every supervisor? She blinked in surprise. After several seconds, she answered quietly. What does hospitality mean when no one important is watching? Marcus gave a slow nod. Do you remember your answer? Olivia closed her eyes briefly. I said every guest deserves to feel seen. Marcus looked around the lobby. That was an excellent answer. Another silence followed, heavier than before. What happened to it? Olivia's voice broke as she finally answered honestly. I stopped seeing people. I started seeing appearances. I started making decisions too quickly. Marcus did not interrupt her. I thought I was protecting the image of the hotel, she continued. Instead, I became the reason it lost its image. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she remained composed. I am deeply sorry, not because you own this company, but because I failed your daughter. Marcus looked toward Ava, who was beginning to stir beneath the blanket. Her sleepy eyes slowly opened. She looked around the unusually quiet lobby before smiling when she saw her father. Daddy, she whispered. Marcus immediately knelt beside her. I am right here, sweetheart. Ava looked at the executives surrounding them with innocent curiosity. Are all these people waiting for us? Several employees smiled despite the tension. Marcus gently brushed a curl away from her face. Yes, we were having an important conversation. Ava glanced toward Miss Helen, who still stood nearby with her linen cart. The nice lady gave me a blanket, she said happily. Marcus smiled. I know. Ava looked at Helen and waved. Thank you. Helen waved back, her eyes shining. The simple exchange softened the atmosphere more than any corporate speech could have. Marcus slowly stood again. Children have a remarkable gift, he said quietly. They remember kindness long after they forget luxury. Every person in the lobby listened carefully. Tonight, Ava will remember the blanket, not the chandelier. She will remember Miss Helen's smile, not the marble floors. That is the legacy we should all be building. Sarah exchanged a meaningful glance with the executives. None of them needed further explanation. The lesson had already reached far beyond one employee or one hotel. It had become a mirror held up to everyone who carried the Bennett name on their uniform. Marcus took a slow breath before looking at Sarah Whitmore once again. Now we can discuss accountability, he said calmly. Not because I was the one standing here tonight, but because someone else could be standing here tomorrow. Sarah nodded and opened the leather portfolio she had carried into the lobby. Inside were emergency authority forms reserved for executive action. She spoke with quiet professionalism. After reviewing the events witnessed this evening and based on your direct observations, I am recommending the immediate termination of Olivia Harper's employment for repeated violations of our hospitality standards and company ethics. Human Resources will complete the formal process tonight. Olivia closed her eyes for a brief moment. She did not argue. She did not make excuses. She simply nodded. I understand. Marcus looked at her with compassion rather than satisfaction. Miss Harper, losing a job is difficult. I do not celebrate that. But leadership carries consequences. When a supervisor teaches people to judge appearances instead of character, the damage spreads far beyond one conversation. Olivia quietly removed her name badge from her blazer and placed it on the polished reception counter. The small metallic sound echoed through the silent lobby. I hope one day, she said softly, I earn another opportunity to lead people the right way. Marcus gave a respectful nod. I sincerely hope you do. Sarah then turned toward Ethan Collins. The young receptionist looked terrified. Mr. Collins, Marcus said before Sarah could speak, you made mistakes tonight. But I also believe you were following a culture you did not create. Ethan looked up cautiously. Sir, Marcus continued, you will not lose your position. Instead, beginning next week, you will spend 30 days rotating through every department in this hotel. Housekeeping, maintenance, valet, kitchen, guest services. Learn what hospitality looks like from every perspective before you return behind this desk. Ethan's eyes filled with relief. Thank you, sir. I will not waste that opportunity. Marcus smiled. Make sure you do not. Then he turned toward Miss Helen. Miss Helen Carter. The elderly housekeeper looked almost startled to hear her full name spoken. Yes, sir. How many years have you worked here? 22 this fall. Marcus looked toward Sarah. Please promote Miss Helen into our Guest Experience Advisory Council. I want every new supervisor in this region to spend one full day learning alongside her before they receive leadership responsibilities." Helen covered her mouth in surprise. "Sir, I only clean rooms." Marcus shook his head gently. "No. Tonight you reminded all of us what this company was built to protect. Titles do not create wisdom. Character does." A quiet round of applause began somewhere near the concierge desk. One guest started clapping, then another, until the sound spread naturally across the lobby. Helen's eyes filled with tears as she smiled with humble gratitude. Marcus raised one hand politely, and the applause gradually faded. "Please remember," he said, "this is not a celebration of someone losing a position. It is a reminder that kindness should never be overlooked." Ava slipped her small hand into her father's. "Daddy," she whispered, "can Miss Helen have a hug?" Marcus smiled. "If she would like one." Helen walked over, knelt carefully, and Ava wrapped her arms around her with the innocent warmth only a child could give. The elderly woman closed her eyes for a brief second, overwhelmed by the simple gesture. Around them, the polished marble, the crystal lights, and the elegant decorations suddenly seemed less important than the quiet embrace taking place in the middle of the lobby. Marcus watched silently, knowing that no leadership seminar or corporate presentation could ever teach hospitality as powerfully as that single moment. The lobby slowly returned to life, but nothing about it felt the same. Guests resumed their conversations in softer voices. Employees moved with quieter steps, and the music drifting from the grand piano somehow sounded warmer than before. Marcus took Ava's hand as Sarah approached carrying a room key inside a small leather folder. "Your suite is ready, Mr. Bennett," she said respectfully. Marcus accepted it with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Sarah." Before walking away, he turned one last time toward everyone gathered in the lobby. "Tomorrow morning," he said calmly, "every employee in every Bennett Grand property will receive a handwritten letter from me. Not an email, not a training video, a letter." Several executives exchanged curious glances. Marcus continued, "It will remind everyone why this company exists. We are not in the business of renting rooms. We are in the business of making people feel welcome when they need it most." Sarah nodded quietly. She already knew exactly what the first project of the morning would be. Marcus looked toward Ethan, who stood a little straighter than before, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the evening. He looked toward Daniel, whose quiet integrity had earned new respect. Finally, he looked toward Miss Helen, who still held the little stuffed rabbit Ava had accidentally left on the chair. "Sweetheart," Marcus said gently. Ava turned around just as Helen hurried over with a warm smile. "You almost forgot your little friend." Ava laughed softly as she hugged the rabbit against her chest. "Thank you, Miss Helen." The elderly woman smiled. "Sleep well tonight." Ava looked up at her father. "Daddy, can we come visit her again tomorrow?" Marcus smiled with quiet pride. "I think she would like that very much." Helen's eyes glistened as she nodded. Marcus and Ava walked toward the elevators together, their reflections stretching across the polished marble floor beneath the warm golden lights. When the elevator doors opened, Ava looked back across the lobby one last time. "Daddy," she asked. "Yes. You always tell me that being kind is stronger than being important." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "I do." She smiled. "I think Miss Helen is very strong." Marcus laughed softly. "I think you are exactly right." The elevator doors closed with a quiet chime, carrying father and daughter upward while the lobby remained still for several moments. Sarah finally turned toward the executives. "Tomorrow starts tonight," she said. One by one, employees removed the bronze mission statement from the wall and carefully carried it into the conference room. Not because the words were wrong, but because everyone agreed they should never again become something people walked past without truly seeing. Outside, the rain had completely disappeared. Moonlight reflected across the hotel windows, and the Silver Bennett grand name shined against the night sky with renewed meaning. Inside, guests would probably remember the beautiful architecture, the elegant music, and the luxurious rooms. But the people who had witnessed that evening would remember something far more valuable. They would remember a tired little girl wrapped in a simple blanket, an elderly housekeeper whose kindness changed the direction of an entire company, and a father who proved that true leadership never begins with power. It begins with character. And long after the marble floors lost their shine and the chandeliers grew old, that lesson would remain the brightest thing ever built inside those walls.